And welcome to the expert breakout sessions for SOA and API Summit. And this is the session for Neuron ESB. And with us again, Marty Woznicki, General Manager at Neuron ESB. Marty, welcome back.
Thanks, Vance.
You know, we're really glad to have Marty with us this morning. He is responsible for all aspects of the Neuron ESB business, including development and architecture. So a really terrific incentive to understand both the design time and runtime of ESB integration. He brings 25 years experience in application development and service integration to his current post, and he previously worked for Microsoft Product Group leading ESB initiatives. So a terrific perspective on the enterprise class integration in Marty's overview. In his session, using an enterprise service bus to simplify SOA and application integration for .NET, he's going to explain why use an ESB for these kind of use cases, integration on the .NET platform, abstracting systems using both SOA and REST, certainly a topic very popular today, and the importance of extensibility to expose business processes as SOA and REST endpoints. And just a quick reminder, if you haven't already done so, you could download Marty's slides by clicking the download button right here under the viewing area. You'll see in that same region that he brought some great downloadable resources. They are available for you right now without any extra registration required. And we love to make this interactive where we can. So if you have a comment or question for Marty, just type that into the submit a question box you see under the view. And with that, let me turn it to Marty. And Marty, give us a sense using an ESB to simplify SOA and application integration for .NET developers.
Well, thanks, Vance. Thanks for having us there. Well, I'm definitely going to talk about Neuron and how we're the application and service integration platform for Microsoft.NET. Before getting into the thick of things, I'd like to spend a little time discussing why organizations would adopt an ESB, what an ESB is or can be, and how it's evolved over the years. Let's think for a moment about all the challenges companies face today. First, when we think about why an ESB, many companies are deploying multiple systems that do a variety of things like HR, payroll, supply chain management. They may be involved in acquiring other companies that may have their own systems and manual processes. They may have legacy systems that aren't integrated. A good case in point with this, I once spoke to a large, well-known retailer. They were selling their products on the web. But what's interesting was each morning they would have to manually enter those orders that they received from the portal into an older mainframe-based application. This is one of the reasons why so many companies are in the midst of modernization efforts. In any case, most companies want a 360-degree view of their business as well as their customers, and they want it in near real time, not at the end of the week. If they can reach that state, then that means they're able to make better and more timely decisions that directly impact their business. So, lots of reasons why to use an ESB. Now, the larger question, what exactly is an enterprise service bus? Now, I think the label enterprise service bus, i.e. ESB, has really evolved into an overloaded term. Initially, years ago, we could say that an enterprise service bus was software architecture for integration middleware, provided foundational services, complex application topologies. It certainly incorporated features required to implement a service-oriented architecture. But services have changed now. We're working with SOA, services still SOAP-based, but also REST. There's just as much REST-based service work done now as there is SOAP. Now ESBs have evolved into full-blown integration brokers, shipping pub-sub messaging systems, some kind of graphical business process automation tool, long-running workflow, as well as service mediation and hosting capabilities. ESBs are commonly used to tie systems together quickly, acting much like a universal translator. They're used to automate processes, provide service composition capabilities, and reduce the overall development effort. They also allow organizations to abstract their back-end processes, systems, and services from all their consuming client-facing applications, so that means they can make changes quickly without impacting those clients. Ultimately, they provide a set of foundational services, tools, and infrastructure that customers can use to build full-blown solutions for their business. In essence, many function today as development platforms. Every now and again, I hear some developer answer the integration question with, you only need the right web services answer. So let's be clear. Web services alone can't solve the integration problems. They can provide for standards and consistency. That's about it. When web services need to be developed, what has to happen? It means someone is writing the integration logic by hand, wrapping it in a web service wrapper, then providing or building a reliable hosting environment. It usually means they also have to roll their own monitoring, reporting, and instrumentation. And worse, when developers use the service directly in a client-facing application, they're creating tight coupling between their application and the service. But now look at ESBs. Most ESBs can host web services. Most allow developers to create a web service just through configuration alone, no code required, to create, host, monitor, or report on these web services. Many organizations will use an ESB to expose a legacy system as a set of SOAP or REST-based services by virtue of application adapters that they ship. A good example might be connecting to the mainframe using an MQ series adapter, but fronting it with the service hosted by the ESB. And because an ESB can be used to abstract back-end services, it essentially decouples the client applications that are making those requests. As I previously said, ESBs have evolved a lot over time, along with enterprise integration architecture as a whole. A lot of companies are still doing point-to-point. These are the ones who are usually either resource constrained, always in put-out fire mode, or simply haven't been exposed to enterprise application integration alternatives. Point-to-point works great if you have a few applications. But as you add additional applications, modifications to those systems become more time-consuming and more expensive. The cost of a change or the addition of a new integration point will exponentially grow as more applications are added. Systems are very tightly coupled, so changes become harder and more riskier to make. Hub and spoke has its place, but can be problematic, typically harder to scale, and you still get that tight coupling between systems. Then there's the bus. Scales well, usually less coupling, offers a level of abstraction and reuse that the others don't. The bus architecture can also provide logical centralization, but physical decentralization. Now it's interesting, Neuron ESB actually supports both hub and spoke and the ESB topologies. A friend of mine used to say all the time, friends, don't let friends do point-to-point. Kind of interesting. Always like that. As I said earlier, ESBs have evolved beyond just mere messaging capabilities. These are just some of the higher level features that some ESB vendors provide today, including Neuron ESB. Workflow engine capability, service orchestration, so you can actually compose larger service capabilities from existing services within the enterprise, message translation and routing, transformation, and the service mediation and hosting. You might be calling services on the back end that aren't secure, yet you could still secure them on the front end just through the ESB. Monitoring and reporting, and then when we talk about non-functional capabilities, we're really talking about bridging other transports, database, applications, using some sort of bridge technology like adapters. So now let's talk a little bit about Neuron ESB and its unique place in the universe. First and foremost, what should stand out for everyone is that Neuron ESB is a full ESB and integration broker, built entirely on the Microsoft.NET platform. Later we'll discuss why that's important to anyone wanting to reduce their development costs. One of the reasons we created Neuron ESB was to combat the high development costs that so many vendors incurred onto our customers. Historically, this space has been rife with buy $1 of middleware and sign an SOW for $1 million of consulting services. I think that's primarily where many of these big vendors made their money. Unfortunately, this was the norm, not the exception. I think a lot of traditional technologies that were used to build those tool sets were far more complex and much more difficult to use. Often, after the customer bought the software, they'd have to run out and try to find a small army of consultants who had a PhD in that software and paid top dollar for them. Because of the complexity, any hope of accelerating the time to market equation was lost. In fact, many of these projects would either turn into failures or extend much longer than originally planned. Once the consultants left, the software turned into shelfware. With Neuron ESB, we wanted to be different. We didn't just want to lower product price points. We really wanted to eliminate the need for specialists altogether, as well as reduce the long-term operational costs, since that's where the bulk of the expenses come from, development operations. We thought, build something really easy to use and learn so that any junior .NET developer could master it in a matter of days. That would have true value for any company. Simplify everything, starting from development, deployment, all the way through operations. What's the result? Solutions built in a fraction of the time for the fraction of the cost. We've proven this model out with our customers. 75% or more never engage our consulting services. So what exactly does that mean? This means that customers get to leverage their own resources or outsource to junior .NET development resources for a fraction of the cost. Most just do the work themselves. I think we've spoken enough about the value of Neuron ESB. Now let's see how we work in the SOA and REST world, bringing complex systems together to build more agile solutions. First, let's take a look at our integration architecture. Neuron can abstract all endpoints, whether they're SOAP or REST, or any third-party application, database, transport, protocol, with a hierarchical topic-based pub/sub messaging system. Within Neuron, an endpoint is an endpoint. It doesn't matter whether it's SOAP or REST, or it's SAP, Salesforce, or NetSuite, or a database. Now, in this type of architecture, anything can act as a publisher. Anything can act as a subscriber, but one doesn't need to know about the other, and any change on one doesn't affect the other. Topics themselves control where a request is routed, but it also controls the quality of the service. We're also unique here, where even the network transport can be configured at the topic level. In some cases, you may want in-memory routing, so when you're using SOAP or REST-based services. In other cases, you might want durable messaging. Here's an example of how Neuron ESB's integration architecture can be used to tie various systems together. This example uses REST as well as application adapters that ship with Neuron. This shows the process of creating an email campaign files in Salesforce and sending them to something like Marketo. First, a user creates an email campaign file using the Salesforce UI. When done creating the file, it's submitted to Neuron via Salesforce callout to a Neuron-hosted REST endpoint. When Neuron processes the file, it publishes it to a topic. Marketo then subscribes to that topic via our FTP adapter. When finished collecting all the responses, Marketo sends a response back to the system via FTP, and Neuron picks it up with the file with the FTP adapter. Neuron processes that file, publishes it back to a topic, and then Salesforce subscribes to the message from that topic and uploads it via a REST call to the Apex service using our Salesforce adapter. The advantage of using something like Neuron ESB for this type of integration is fairly simple. Adapters can abstract the details of the system from the developer. They just need to know the message. Developers don't have to worry about creating the services, whether they're SOAP or REST. They don't have to worry even that much about the payload. Neuron ESB is creating those endpoints for them. It's easy to develop and deploy the solution. A lot less code is written. The platform is providing that delta. And security hops can be handled by the adapters or by the service endpoints that Neuron are hosting. And once the system endpoints are set up, they can be reused over and over again and aggregated to build larger, more full-featured capabilities. Now, endpoints, whether they are application or service endpoints, can be easily decoupled for customer applications to talk to. And I guess a good question is, why would I want to decouple them in the first place? If you look at how most developers work with services, they tend to work directly against them by creating these tightly coupled proxies in the consuming and client applications. This is very much the case on the .NET platform using Visual Studio. Not necessarily their fault. It's the tools that do it for them to make it easier for them to work with services. However, this creates tight coupling between the service endpoint and the customer application. Now, what this means, if you make a change in any of those back-end services, like version them, add new capabilities, change the signature, etc., the developer has to recompile all the customer applications that reference the service. A friend of mine used to call this SOAP over RPC, back to the calm days. However, when you place Neuron ESB as the broker, we can host a generic SOAP or REST endpoint. We can inspect the inbound request. Depending on the source, context, or content, the request can be dynamically routed to the correct service, whether that be SOAP or REST or even an application endpoint. Also, since the request is being brokered by Neuron, Neuron can do any mediation, enrichment, or even full-blown process automation in the middle. This also means that any change to the back-end systems will not necessitate a change to the customer applications. We've spent a good deal of time now on what an ESB is, what it can provide, as well as some interesting scenarios using the out-of-the-box service and adapter capabilities. So now let's spend a moment or two on extensibility and why it's important. Why is extensibility so important? Because ESBs have essentially become horizontal development platforms that companies build custom, sometimes vertically focused solutions on top of. We've already spoken about the services and infrastructure that an ESB provides. Those are services and infrastructure that can be readily deployed and leveraged in any development effort. I've always believed that regardless of the industry you're in, all customers share a common set of problems when it comes to integration. But it's almost impossible to anticipate every need, be able to support every system out of the box. Hence, ESBs have to be first and foremost extensible through customization supported by the product. As integration scenarios get more complex, customizations are always necessary. There is no magic solution to this. We really need three things for developers to be not just effective, but also productive at making customizations. First, it's got to follow an agile approach, since that's the way most developers work. That means things like the product being type agnostic, eliminating references, the runtime being self-aware, being able to recognize when changes are being made, supporting Xcopy deployment, simulation, and debugging. Nothing is worse when the developer has to spend days just trying to determine if some customization they wrote actually works or not, especially when the customization itself may have been only 2 lines of code. This is one of the main reasons why developers don't like to work with these types of products. There's too much time banging their head against the wall. Now second, extensibility points need to be accessible. Well, what does that mean? It means you need to be able to make customizations where they would be the most effective, cost the least amount of effort and time. And then lastly, they've got to be easy to use. Now this should go without saying. However, I've heard horror stories about customers attempting to write adapters to systems in other products. When I was with Microsoft, we gave up on the thought that a customer would ever be able to write a BizTalk adapter. You truly had to have a PhD in the product to make it happen. Let's talk about some of the extensibility points in Neuron ESB. There's actually quite a few, which include adapters, service endpoints, business processes, and workflows. Pretty much all the places where it makes sense. First, when we think about adapters serve to bridge applications, databases, technologies, or protocols. They bridge it to the bus so that developers don't have to worry about the communication aspects of the protocols of those systems they're talking to. They just need to understand the message. And building adapters with Neuron is amazingly easy. We're looking at one interface, 2 methods. In fact, probably half of our customers build custom adapters, sometimes not necessarily because they should, because it is so easy to do. And that's important because there are so many systems that exist now. There is no vendor that is going to ship an adapter for all and every system that exists on this planet. And then the ones that do ship many, many adapters, some just simply are not that functional. Now, when you start working with adapters and other systems, whether those are databases, whether those are line of business systems like SAP, NetSuite, Salesforce, or whether those are web services, metadata becomes fairly important. Neuron ESB ships with a metadata wizard that allows the developer to walk through, scan those back-end operations, and auto-generate XML schemas and even sample messages, so it takes the guesswork out of the developer. Within Neuron ESB, service endpoints are another extensibility point within the product. Our product is built on the Microsoft.NET stack, and we built our broker on the Microsoft Windows Communication Foundation, which means we support all the same extensibility points that WCF does. So things like custom configuration files, custom behaviors, and custom bindings, these are all configurable and supported directly within the product. When you start bridging external systems and you start doing more complex integrations, that means business processes become very important. Whether you're doing simple veto patterns like validate, extract, transform, operate, whether you're doing data enrichment, maybe running some business rules, even calling out to some external systems. Business processing and automation of that, being able to mediate between 2 systems, well, it becomes important and it should be easy to do. Within Neuron, you can create these custom business processes just through drag and drop interface. And that's very powerful because you don't have to compile anything into an assembly. All you have to do is hit save because why? The Neuron runtime is self-aware. And you can do anything within a business process, including writing .NET code or even JavaScript. So Neuron ESB ships with Visual Studio like code editors. that plug and play directly in our own business process designer, and later you'll see in our own workflow designer as well. But it allows developers to make any customization they want ad hoc, and there's no complexity to it. There's no compilation necessary. Everything's compiled on the fly the first time things are run by the Neuron ESB runtime. The developer doesn't do anything. They get IntelliSense though, they get the debugging that they need, they're able to reference third-party assemblies if they need to, but things become simple and customizations become quick. The business process designer also supports being able to create business process steps. So the graphical objects that you drag and drop, well, a business may want to create their own ones. Because why? They might have proprietary business logic that they don't want developers to change, but it can be property grid driven. So they can create that so it can be reused and encapsulated. And just like adapters, incredibly simple to do. One interface, one method, compile, and you drop into a folder. They're self-registering. So again, another accessibility point, very easy for developers to leverage. When you're customizing and using the business process designer, it's very important that developers are able to test and debug the work that they're doing. As I said earlier, developers hate nothing more than banging their head against the wall for days, wondering why something doesn't work. And we learned early on through our customers that as they developed more complex processes with our engine, the need to not just do simulation, but real-time step-by-step debugging became just paramount. So we created our own .NET debugger, our own watch window. Developers can F5, step through code and steps to see in real time what their variable state is, what the process state is, and see what those results are. That way they spend their time on the business logic and not on wondering if the tool is working. Another customization that we ship is being able to use workflow. With workflow, just like the business process engine, you can customize and do a lot of things. But with workflow, this could be a process that's long-running in nature, where you need the business resiliency, you need the fault tolerance, the persistence, and the tracking. And we built ours off of WF, the workflow foundation that ships with Microsoft.NET. Having something that can fail, start up where it left off, important. But just like with the business process engine, when you're creating a business process, just like when you're creating a workflow, you can expose any one of these as a RESTful or SOAP-based service through Neuron ESB. And that really brings us to our next state, exposing business processes as SOA and RESTful endpoints. Service composition, the cornerstone of business innovation. Neuron ESB excels at taking existing services and applications, and whether these are existing in the enterprise, whether these are new, whether these are complex business processes created by our designer, we can take all these things and compose those into new capabilities and expose them as either new SOAP or REST-based services. It's pretty powerful when you don't have to write a whole lot of code to make new capabilities happen in the organization. Through the service composition capabilities of Neuron ESB, we can enable some fairly complex patterns. In fact, we ship quite a few, one being scatter-gather. This is an interesting scenario where it entails a synchronous invocation of a variety of services. Sometimes you don't know how many. Mediation, protocol transformation, some dynamic routing, mapping of results, maybe even returning the final aggregation of those results back to the original caller, or sending them off to some other location. But Neuron ESB makes it fairly easy to do this. These kind of complex patterns can be made very easily using our business process designer or our workflow designer. Both provide the capabilities to easily design these kind of complex patterns and expose them using our deployment wizard as either a SOAP or a REST service. And once that service is deployed, those processes can be monitored using the Neuron ESB endpoint health, or they can be monitored using the RESTful interfaces that Neuron ESB exposes. One of the nice things about Neuron is how it's built internally. We built Neuron as a set of composable services, so almost every internal subsystem that we use is actually exposed by either REST or SOAP, hence the endpoint health system. Although endpoint health in real time is exposed to our UI, it's also exposed via WMI, Windows Management Instrumentation, perf counters and events, but we've also exposed this with a RESTful interface that you can test and get results right from the site on. Well, that concludes my formal session. I hope you saw that Neuron ESB can provide a lot of value in the SOA and REST world, whether it's exposing new processes as SOAP and REST-based services, or creating new ones, or tying these systems together. Well, I want to turn it back over to Vince and see if there are any questions.
Marty, thanks for the grand tour of Neuron ESB and especially drill down into how both developers as well as integration architects and service folks can all get a handle on the kind of capabilities you've got there at Neuron ESB. Really great session. Thanks a lot.
You're very welcome.
So Marty, as you might expect, a lot of good questions have come in about the trending of ESBs these days, as well as implementation and use case questions. And so let's start with one of these. What are the most popular ESB use cases in today's .NET Enterprise? And can the speaker identify any new ESB patterns that are emerging that are showing to be useful or exciting?
I think I still see service composition being the most popular out there, but now we're using service composition to tie things together like Salesforce and NetSuite, not just the older ERP programs like Oracle and SAP. We're seeing more Workday, we're seeing more Salesforce, NetSuite, more cloud-based applications, and using ESBs to tie in the cloud to on-prem.
You know, it's a really great point, Marty, because we actually have kind of an architect slant on that same question, and it touches on that very point. It simply says, how does Neuron ESB promote integration to and beyond the edge, such as for APIs and cloud-based iPaaS or SaaS?
Well, Neuron ESB can be used either in the cloud or on-prem and can certainly bridge both. We have customers today doing that, either hosting in Amazon or hosting in Azure. And the nice thing about Neuron is it can be used in the DMZ or outside the DMZ, and we can actually broker securely back into an internal zone. So even though the request might be coming in from Salesforce, from the cloud, internally, the network believes it's actually coming from the internal instance of Neuron.
You know, Marty, this whole world of converging the ESB, many of our attendees of which, of course, have had for many years, in these new worlds of SOAP and SOA and REST, I'd like to get your sense on how they are kind of coming together among your customers. And one question that taps into that is, you mentioned hosting a SOAP or REST endpoint. What are the benefits? Cost, governance, security, or what?
So the nice thing with ESB is that, well, and not all ESBs, but certainly Neuron, we can host our own endpoints, which we do. And the benefit of that is we can expose generic on-ramps and extract those back endpoints. So we get rid of all the tight coupling. That means you can change things far quicker, right? Things are more agile. And the customer isn't aware of what they're actually calling. Now, things that we do, right? There's some governance things that we do, but not a lot of governance things. We certainly don't do a lot of the API management activities that you see out there in API management suites. But in the future, you're going to see more and more of that. I think the demand has always been to add more capabilities to ESB suites. You know, as I said earlier in the presentation, ESBs have evolved over time. You know, when ESBs first came out, they were really more about messaging and service infrastructure, et cetera. But now when you look at these, they've got full-blown process designers. We've got long-running fault-tolerant clustered workflow now, lots of application adapters. Really the next thing I'm seeing is a lot of customers are almost demanding that third-party monitoring as well as API management, what you're seeing today in some of these suites of tools, they actually come into that ESB suite. I see that all the time. We've had customers ask us when we are going to develop the API management and have it part of the core product. And it's something that we're working on for Neuron 4.0 right now. I think a lot of it is that customers really don't want to work to integrate multiple packages together anymore. They just want one package that's fully integrated.
I think that's so true. And in fact, here's another question. The question reads, you mentioned being able to create new capabilities exposed by SOAP and REST. Can the speaker please explain? We have a vast amount of difficulty in servicizing our legacy resources. Can Neuron ESB help us with that process?
You can actually create the entire business logic for a web service using our business process designer or our workflow designer. So you can actually do quite a bit without actually having to call back out to another service. And then using our adapters, you can incorporate any existing back-end application capability into that same process. So that's where I see more and more work being done. We added some new capabilities with 3.5 that just makes that a lot easier to do for developers. Far easier for them to create a business process, wire in some existing application calls and service calls, and then just expose the entire thing as a web service. So now what's happening, you're creating a web service with kind of a click of a gun, so to speak, and you've got a graphical design of your business logic.
You know, it's so enlightening to hear the whole menu of capabilities you've got, Marty. I think that you've kind of shaken the old long-held definitions of what an ESB does. And I got a question here. I think it's actually from an ESB user. It's a pretty good one. Could the speaker walk us through the lifecycle approach, design, test, and run, that Neuron ESB takes for application integration? It sounds like a lot more than what we use with our current ESB, which we've had for years.
So it's interesting with Neuron, we took a very different approach to configuration store than most vendors do. Most vendors use a database. So there's a lot of kind of crazy things that you got to do for deployment. Within a Neuron solution itself, you can actually create specific deployment groups. Like you might have one for development. You actually might have several for development, one for QA, one for staging, one for production. Or you could have as many as you like, right? You can call them whatever you want. And you can create variables in those values for each one that's specific. Now, the configuration, you use the Neuron ESB Explorer to create this, but every entity within a Neuron ESB solution, whether that is a business process, a workflow, whether that is an XLT document, whether it's a topic, whether it's a publisher or subscriber, whether it's a service endpoint or an adapter endpoint, every entity is saved as an individual XML file into a folder structure. And so what we use is source control. So you can use Git, you can use TFS as your source control for a Neuron solution. So you can actually have multiple developers work on the same solution because they can go into source control and check in and check out the actual entities that they want to work with. And then deployment becomes fairly easy. Once you, say, take that solution, you go to your, say, QA box, use source control, download the version of the solution you want to QA or test. Once you're done, upload that, go to your production server, download it back down. And the Neuron ESB runtime that's configured on each one of these servers, they're configured to recognize a specific deployment group. So the minute you lay those files down on the server, the runtime will recognize it, pick up all the changes, do all the compilations on the fly, and you're live. So deployment becomes very, very easy. Deployment becomes almost the same life cycle that you would use just writing, say, if it was a C# project or Java project. In this case, you're just dealing with every entity within a Neuron solution is just an XML file.
Wow, that is pretty powerful. And another feature that I think came in, Marty, while you were describing that, is this idea about the context awareness that you've got with both the services but also the content that might be involved in the data that's there. And the comment and question, I guess kind of a combination, says, many of our ESB integration projects that have been around for a while have done routing, of course, but they're not quite what we'd call deep content or context aware. Does Neuron ESB do anything to deliver more awareness for that kind of deeper integration?
So what we do is we make all the metadata. When you're working within Neuron and working within the Neuron solution, you're always dealing with what we call a Neuron ESB message. Now, the core body can be anything. We're type agnostic, so it could be a PDF file, it could be a winword.exe, it could be a JSON message, it could be an XML message. But within that ESB message itself, there are header properties. In other words, you can have custom metadata that you place there yourself, but we also extract all the metadata from, say, the transport or technology the message came in on. So imagine you got a message via a service that we were hosting, if that was SOAP or REST. Well, all of a sudden now you'd have HTTP properties and SOAP properties that you can actually inspect at runtime and use that information to, say, dynamically route the message. You could determine the message came in on IP address X, or if you're using Windows authentication in the enterprise, it came in from Jane, and maybe there's some custom information in the SOAP header or HTTP header, and based on that, you could use our rules engine to say, hey, this is going to version 1 of that service versus, oh, this came in from Joe, and maybe from this IP address, or this information was in the SOAP header, or maybe this was in the body of the message, and now this is going to version 3 of that service. So all that information is made available via IntelliSense right within the designer. So it makes it very easy for developers to create dynamic routing scenarios. And it's very often the case when you're working with messaging system that that kind of custom message data anyhow tends to be used for custom processing requirements.
Wow, you know, speaking of ease of use, just a quick question comes in, Marty, just to define the customer base that you serve. And the question here says, we like the ease of use for the developer as well as what seems to be the intelligent runtime capabilities of Neuron ESB. What about it is optimized for .NET? Can any environment use Neuron ESB?
So you always have to remember, we built Neuron on .NET, right, on the .NET platform, .NET framework. So it's built entirely on .NET. It runs on Windows. But it's a service broker and an integration platform, which means through the service capabilities it has or through the adapters that it ships, it can connect, talk to, and expose anything, regardless of what operating system it's installed on. Neuron itself, the runtime, needs to be installed on Windows. But, you know, we have customers using it to talk to the mainframe, to talk to Linux boxes, obviously FTP, things of that nature, JAX RPC services. You know, it's fairly easy for us to call. We exist in quite a few heterogeneous environments. Thomson Reuters is a big TIBCO and Oracle shop, yet they own a site license of Neuron ESB.
Wow, that's excellent. You know, I have a feeling that people would like to kick the tires and maybe even access a free trial to Neuron ESB, see what you've got there in both the design time and put it through its paces. Have you got an option for a free trial or how folks can kick the tires?
Absolutely. You can come to our website and there's a free 30-day download evaluation edition, and it's the full edition. So it does everything. Everything ships in the product, so we don't limit you in any way. Download it, and we'll email you a 30-day evaluation key.
Excellent, excellent. And I think that with your permission of your team, we can actually put that link right here in your breakout room and let people get to that page. And thanks very much for taking so many questions and for such a great tour of the Neuron ESB feature set. I think many folks that think they know what an ESB does may have been a bit surprised at how far it's come in 2015. Thanks again for your session.
Well, thank you again, Vance, for having us.
And as we love to do here at SOA and API Summit, we're going to leave a slide up here with many of the other links that Marty discussed, the features of Neuron ESB, a bit more about the customers, and those are going to be available for you when you download the slides. Those links will be live. Thanks, everyone.